Welcome to the Female Stoic podcast. My name is Stephanie Poppins, and I am an advocate for literary empowerment. That means I believe the examples set by the literary masters can broaden our life perspective, create increased self-awareness, and empower us to overcome the obstacles we encounter here in the 21st century. By listening and referring what we hear to Stoic philosophy, we can foster a strong sense of self and navigate the world more effectively. This podcast takes the form of both discussions and meditations. And if you like what you hear, you might consider looking me up on my socials, where I post empowering videos every day. Or you may like my classic audiobooks and original stories available on my website, neworldbooks.uk. Happy listening. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Female Stoic podcast. Today I will be looking at how easy it is to get Stoicism wrong, to misinterpret what it actually means to be Stoic. And I will be referring to the character of Aunt Polly in Pollyanna. As you probably know if you have listened to my previous episodes, the title character in Pollyanna is Miss Pollyanna Whittier, an 11-year-old orphan who goes to live in the fictional town of Beldingsville in Vermont with her wealthy but stern and cold Aunt Polly. Look out for that audiobook wherever you listen to audiobooks, and don't forget to catch up with my tracks on Insight Timer, where I have playlists you can listen to the story chapter to chapter. So let's begin. The most common misconception about Stoicism is that it teaches the suppression of all emotions, aiming for this cold, robotic-like existence, aiming for us to almost wear a mask, hide behind something that is akin to neutrality, but a forced neutrality, something that is not coming from a foundation, a strong, solid foundation of inner strength, but something that is coming from a need to hide, which is not, of course, Stoicism at all. In reality, Stoicism focuses on transforming unhealthy irrational emotions or passions, reactivity as it were, into healthy expressions of our feelings when in public, for example, in a managed way, so that we can then protect our inner peace. It's not to negate the value of the emotion at all, but to understand it is chaotic, fleeting, and needs to vibrate in its own particular place, one that we can hold close to us, but not within our inner citadel. And this is never more relevant than in the 21st century, where great value is put upon financial stability and financial success, and in fact this is used as the foundation upon which we so build our stability, our emotional stability, our psychological stability, which of course we know is ridiculous because money comes and goes. Financial situations are ever changing, so they do not represent that foundation. The Female Stoic podcast is seeking to represent that philosophical foundation, that return to virtue, that understanding that we do have certain elements of our life within our power, and when we focus on those and understand everything external to that we have no control over, we then are able to create a stronger, more solid foundation upon which to build our inner wellness. So we're talking about what Stoicism is not. We're talking about how to get it wrong, because in the past there have been many interpretations of just that. Today we are looking at the Victorian era in particular. Why? Because this is when Pollyanna was written. And one of the key characters in this story is Aunt Polly herself. So you have Pollyanna Whittier, who unfortunately is orphaned, and she has to go and live with her Aunt Polly. And her Aunt Polly is a staunch, reactive, hard-nosed character who refuses to accept that at the beginning of the book, that in fact her behaviour reflects an underlying tension. It denotes her inability to face her demons, face those issues which she has been running away from. And along comes her niece, and she is put in this situation of, well, it's a matriarchal position. She's put in this position, and this, of course, forces her into studying her own self, her own capabilities as a maternal figure, her own failings, and accept the advice and guidance of someone much younger than her, who has in fact come to a Stoic philosophy all on her own. Now, Pollyanna had advice from her father when she was very young about facing difficulty and understanding that she had to try and find something glad, something to be glad about within each difficulty. And so she carried that philosophy on throughout her life, and in doing so taught her aunt that philosophy too, and many others around her. Now, we have to remember that the literature of this time was didactic, and it was designed to teach young girls moral lessons. So we give a nod to that and appreciate that is one of the driving forces behind this story. But when we put all that aside and just look at the juxtaposition between the characters of Aunt Polly and Pollyanna, we can see where one gets it so right, the other gets it so wrong. Of course, as with any literature and successful story, there has to be a stark contrast between the two. But there is nuance, and as we come to realise, Aunt Polly has some redeeming qualities, and when she faces what she's been running away from the past, in fact, she turns into quite a nice character after all. So Aunt Polly is who we are speaking about at the beginning of the book today, because she is somebody who got Stoicism very wrong. And this is the irony I find in this story. We have Pollyanna, who is supposedly a child naive, and yet she is practicing one form of Stoicism, and then you have Aunt Polly, who is this Victorian straight-laced character who is practicing what she considers what was acceptable in the time for Victorians of a reframing of Stoicism, this stiff upper lip, which is not really addressing the problem of reactivity at all. And what I have found in Stoicism is the strength, the power in the philosophy is the understanding that it is reactivity that is causing us misery, not in fact the emotion itself, but how we are using it, how we are abusing it, and over-elevating its importance in our lives, so that we then become reactive and we're not holding it away from us to vibrate in its own space and not control our inner peace. So this is what Aunt Polly does. Victorian Stoicism. Stoicism with a capital S. Initially cold and obsessed with propriety was Aunt Polly. Now, as with any philosophy or religion, it can be worn as a mask and hidden behind, which is what Aunt Polly was doing. In the beginning of the book, she represents a hardened character, the antithesis of joy, the antithesis of youth, and yet this was promoted in Victorian times. The idea that one must just simply put up and shut up, that emotional expression itself was frowned upon. This was a repressive time. The Stoic philosophy, it seemed, was taken too far. Intense emotions were considered a threat to physical and mental health. They were often associated with weakness, or in women, hysteria. Women were often stereotyped as emotionally unstable, oversensitive, and prone to hysteria, leading to their confinement to the private and domestic sphere. And men, of course, were expected to be in control, and so encouraged to suppress any feeling whatsoever. This was an extreme interpretation of Stoicism. And of course, as we know, Stoicism is about the management of emotions, yes, the understanding that they can be used for enabling us to create, to empower us, but that we allow them by the acknowledgement of their power to vibrate in a certain sphere, to hold them in their place, to keep them accountable, to avoid them becoming so powerful we become reactive to external forces, which of course are ever-changing. So going back to Aunt Polly and Pollyanna, she confused this strict duty that she had with love, and this led to a cold, isolated life. She focused on propriety. She focused on charitable obligation to be seen to be doing the right thing, rather than the warmth that comes with embracing your virtue, the things you hold dear, what you have to offer people close to you and those that you meet. There's a distance there between appearance and what is actually going on inside. So again, virtue almost used as a mask, virtual signalling at its finest. And to her, Pollyanna was someone to be managed rather than to be cherished. She maintained this proper lady facade, a rigid exterior. She resisted the glad game that Pollyanna introduced. She refused to see the positive in everything, and this created an awkward atmosphere. It was strained in her house. She was isolated herself. All of these actions and decisions she took were wearing the mask of Stoicism, but actually were reactive. She was being reactive to her interpretation of how Dr. Chiltern, a love interest, had treated her many years before. So, to go back to the theme of this episode, there are many interpretations of Stoicism. I would suggest the female Stoic is a modern interpretation, but one which seeks to understand the value of emotion, to hold it in its proper, powerful place, but accept that also it is chaotic and not a foundation upon which we can build inner peace. But as we look at these characters in this story, we see that one interpretation, a Victorian traditional interpretation, is in fact seeing emotion as the problem and encouraging us to wear a mask in order to hide that, and almost using it as a stick to beat each other with, which is ridiculous. And then the other interpretation is saying, well, I just choose to see the best in everything, which is rather a naive interpretation, but of course it's been adopted by a child. And this didactic novel, the message here is, let's just consider the innocence of a child. Let's consider the trials you might face, and let's try and create an alternative to how we, as Victorians, have seek to cope in the past. And that's the power of this novel, this juxtaposition and the appreciation of the value of interpretation, and how we as Stoics must seek to empower ourselves with as much knowledge as we can, as much understanding of the philosophy and external reading and further reading and comparison in order to create some working methodology, something that is suitable for the 21st century. And I'm arguing here today that that is a combination of all of the interpretations, taking all of the knowledge, all of the understanding, and trying to come up with something that is going to be suitable for the world we find ourselves in today, which of course is quite challenging. Just as with the Industrial Revolution you had a massive change in the fabric of society, in the way we looked, in the way we communicate and behave towards each other. So now with this media circus that is farming our attention, its currency being our attention, its focus being on financial success, and how our attention can be sold, and we can so ourselves be guided into buying into this idea that We can achieve inner peace and happiness if we just have enough financial stability to do that. This myth that is perpetuated online. So it was never more relevant than to have a Stoic guide to navigating life's difficulties, to Stoic survival in the 21st century. Marcus Aurelius said, "What troubles you is not the event, but your judgment of it." As we can see in Pollyanna, we have two characters, one older, one younger, both interpreting and judging events, external events, differently. It is our reactivity and our management of reactivity that we must focus on. Reactivity is closely linked with emotion, and that's why we talk about managing these emotions. But actually, if we are to look at them as the creativity and the energy they can afford us, if they are managed, it is not the emotions we come to see that are disabling. It's the reactivity, it's the level of emotion and how we are judging externals, how we are judging the actions and decisions made by others, those around us. Those reactions that are actually the problem. Aurelius argued that external objects cannot force their way into the mind, so we as individuals are responsible for our own emotional reactions. He recognized involuntary initial reactions like fear, anger, or sadness are natural, but they should not be allowed to escalate into irrational passions. And that is the point here when we look at Aunt Polly. She has spent so many years in reactivity, even though her external facade appears very controlled. As I said before, this was a common misconception with the Victorians and how they viewed Stoicism, that actually we should wear a mask and we should almost be scared of. What irony. Almost be scared of the emotion itself. In his book Meditations, Aurelius advocated for using rational analysis to dissect emotional triggers, essentially practicing a form of cognitive reframing to maintain inner peace. He believed that by maintaining this honest view from above, distancing ourselves and seeing the situation at arm's length, maintaining it at arm's length, not allowing it to come within our inner citadel, we can then avoid becoming slave to our emotions and, of course, then live in accordance with nature and reason. So let us consider the lessons we can learn from the story Pollyanna. As mentioned before, check out my audiobook or my tracks on Insight Timer. And remember that these stories that we discuss on the Female Stoic podcast were written as observations by women of the time, women that were largely suppressed. They were largely taught to stay at home, be confined in a space that prevented them from going out into wider society and experiencing the ideas or having these conversations with anyone, let alone other women. They were encouraged to focus their energy and their life's work on the home and the nurturing of others, and in fact not question any of these ideas at all. And it was only because of the Bluestocking group in the 18th century and late 18th century that these discussions took place and were then spoken of and as acknowledged as something that could possibly happen. There was a potential there. Whether it was embraced or rejected, it was still brought out into a social setting as a statement by women that we can discuss these things. We are intellectually capable of thinking about these things, and we understand that philosophy can help us navigate our roles as women. And of course, in this story, both Pollyanna and her aunt are both women. And they're both finding ways to cope as women or potential women. If you don't know much about the Bluestocking group, please check out my previous episodes. And if you are interested in journaling tasks and more about how you can incorporate Stoicism in your life through journaling, please check out my writing courses and journaling courses on Insight Timer. And last but not least, a special request for the Women Podcasters Awards that are coming to a close quite shortly. If you have not already, please consider voting for the Female Stoic Podcast in the drop-down menu that is education. Fingers crossed, I hope to have some good news for you next week. And of course, our journal task. We never forget our journal task. This week, I would like you to think about a mask that you have worn. Something that you have adopted in order to cope in a difficult time in the past. Or perhaps you are, if you are honest with yourself, still wearing a mask today. Of course, this task involves great introspection. If you are there yet and you are willing to challenge yourself as to your own actions and reactions, have a think about that this week, and I shall see you next time. Bye. Hey, Stephanie here. Thank you for listening to the Female Stoic Podcast. It is an honour, and I just want to say I really appreciate you being here. It's amazing the power of women in literature and the Stoic messages they have to share. Please, if you can, return the favour by spreading their words and sharing this podcast far and wide so more of us can benefit from their wisdom. And don't forget to leave a review if you like what you heard. See you next time.